I do wonder if they'll talk about 16 while they're out there though, like at the same time, because I saw like Yoshi-P was being pretty funny because he's like, "Hey, would you ever, calibrate with Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 14?" He's like, "Well, I'd have to ask the producer of Final Fantasy 14, who happens to also be named Yoshida by coincidence, and we'll have to get together sometime when it works into our schedule, and we'll see about trying to do something between these two games." It's like, cool. Yeah.
I mean, how jealous would you be if it turned out there was an in-person demo of something for some upcoming Final Fantasy, like a Final Fantasy DLC was revealed at a fan fest or something?
Right. Like, oh, hey, first time you can actually play Final Fantasy VII R Rebirth,
right.
Oh.
And I would love to see it turn into more of a convention like that, a little more of a Square. And like one of the arguments against that was when we talked about this last fan fest, the last in-person fan fest, the argument against it was that what do you do for things like Kingdom Hearts, Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, these things that are well outside the space? And then Square Enix answered that by selling a bunch of those off.
Easy.
So like,
and then firing the CEO.
Yeah. And then it's like, well, what do you do about things that are still kind of outside of it? Things like Forespoken, and they're like, we're folding those in. So like a lot of that stuff is becoming more core. And so Square Enix becomes more of a like universal, like single focused entity. Obviously selling off Deus Ex and Tomb Raider was because they just didn't see them aligning and they thought they should be paired with somebody who did align. The Forespoken team, they said, we like what they do. Just the way they're doing it doesn't make money. So they didn't let them go. They folded them in. They said, we want to retain this talent. As opposed to the Tomb Raider talent, they said, we just want to let that go to somebody that can manage them better. So like the Forespoken thing's not the same thing. So there were a couple of headlines. I saw you retweet one that made it look like they were, I believe the word was snuffed. They were not snuffed. That was a really frustrating headline. And when I looked into that reporter and the fact that that reporter identifies one of their favorite games being Deus Ex, that tells me that reporter is a little bit bitter towards Square Enix because Forespoken was not treated like Deus Ex. This was not Montreal getting just kicked out. Like, you just don't live with us anymore. This was
interesting though, because like that's where it's interesting because then we'll have this probably just as its own topic because I've been wanting to talk to you about it. So we're going to call this WTF Square Enix. Namely so because there's a couple like moving points. So last week, literally Final Fantasy 16 on tour, Yoshi-P doing interviews, gameplay. Honestly, excited. Looks great. Obviously, there's definitely going to be a vocal piece of the community that wants Final Fantasy to return to a turn-based combat system. I don't think that will ever happen if they're still continuing on a Final Fantasy every 6-year release. Meaning, if it was coming out like every 2 years, I could see them being like 1 year, like, hey, we're going to go back to World War II, like how Call of Duty randomly does it. And it's not a big deal. Oh, that's not your favorite time setting?
6 studios and all of a sudden start releasing annual or biannual or something like that. And you have a lot more room to have
experimentation, etc.
Niche combat choices or whatever. They can make really bold choices.
Right. And so in that vein, we have like this weird narrative that has just kind of formed out of Square Enix, Yoshi-P going on interviews talking about like he wishes the rest of the company was even somewhere close in the ballpark to what his division is doing. And Final Fantasy 16, I've pre-ordered the collector's edition. I am excited about 16. I can't wait to experience it, and I really hope that it delivers. It's going to be the first time we get to see what Yoshi-P and his team do when they're not saving a game and also delivering a complete experience, because it's not like, well, how does this work with the next expansion? Yada, 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 things like that. So then you have them letting go the CEO. So he's getting replaced, it seems like, with board approval in June. You have their whole NFT push that's apparently scheduled to come out sometime this spring. And then you have them selling off. And here's the kind of one, like you touched on this point. I was like, oh, we need to talk about this because you gotta be wondering with what's going on, like just internally from a leadership perspective with that company. You have them sell off Tomb Raider, all these other IPs, right? For $300 million, and we're assuming some
anything
debt
that doesn't
went
have a
along with
global
that.
appeal is out the door.
Especially because they're like, we're looking for a global, and then everything that has a global, they sold off for $300 million to specifically, or I might be misremembering, talking about we're going to take this money and use this to help invest in our NFT push, right? Gamers are very turned off from NFTs. Like, this just seems like we're going down this road. We're marching down it, whether it's win, lose, or draw. Here's the thing that I have to just wonder if like the Square Enix board was like, what the hell? Amazon paid $600 million. They sold it for $300, but Amazon paid $600 million for just the Tomb Raider license from Embracer. So Embracer, I don't know how much debt came along with that, but Embracer just made a hell of a deal.
It's possible it was packaged with debt, right? We don't
necessarily know that number. Yeah.
And so like if they sold off some debt with it, then when it comes time to sell off that IP, Embracer may have said, yeah, you gotta take the bad. But obviously there was some profit in there somewhere. The numbers are just absolutely. Even if Embracer had other debt they packaged in with it, it wouldn't matter.
Right. But you got to start to sit here and go, okay, that's quite a turnaround on one IP. And you got to be wondering, like, if they're going like, because it was announced publicly. It was almost like, yo, man, we just paid. Hey, guys, you got to wonder if Amazon was at that table, like, hey, we'll pick these up. We want Tomb Raider and Embracer. And they're like, well, we don't know what this Amazon folks are doing. We're going to go with Embracer. And then they end up going down that direction. And now you're looking at it and saying, well, how much money would like, I don't know. I just got to wonder what those conversations are, because for one IP, that's just pretty outstanding.
Yeah. But FanFest wise, I think that it's possible that Final Fantasy 16 makes an appearance or at least gets a reference. If nothing else, Fan QA is probably going to bring it up. Even if Yoshi-P says don't ask a question about it, people will. Last time, for example, he said the fan Q&A was on day 1. The Blue Mage reveal was on day 2. And they said at the beginning, a member of the community team set up when they introduced the segment, said, please do not ask any questions about Blue Mage because we have a massive segment tomorrow about Blue Mage, and we will be revealing a lot of detail, potential gameplay, potential abilities. We will be answering a ton of questions. And so if you ask a question now, it will not be answered. We will not be able to share on it because we're not going to restate things that just need to get stated tomorrow. What did people do? Somebody still asked a question about Blue Mage. So I'm just telling you, like, Final Fantasy 16 will most likely come up. Some of these fan Q&As result in really weird answers to stuff like that. There was a Q&A, I don't remember when, where a player asked Yoshi-P, if you were ever separate from Square Enix, what type of game would you make? Which is literally like walking into like a group luncheon and asking somebody in front of their boss, like on stage with a microphone being broadcasted worldwide, hey, so if you could quit your job, who would you tell to screw off? He's not going to answer it. Even if he did, even if he was literally in talks with another publisher to leave Square Enix for the potential to make a game he wanted to make that Square Enix told him explicitly he could not make, which is not true. Square Enix has given him an unbelievable amount of leash over the years. But even if that was going on, he still wouldn't disclose it. So like even in the craziest of situations, he was never going to answer that question. But somebody will still ask. So like 16, if nothing else, will likely come up there. If we look back at old 16 questions, those actually turned out to be incredibly revealing because when people said, if you could ever build a different Final Fantasy game, what would it be? And he goes, I don't really know. I'd prefer to talk about 14 at a 14 related event. But as a hypothetical, I would love to see us do something. And I don't remember all the exact examples, but it was stuff like, I wish we could do something more M-rated. I wish we could set something in the type of world that 16 ended up being. I wish we could mess with more of the combat and visualization types of 16. Like he basically each time would describe some element of 16 as a hypothetical. As we go back and look at those, they were very brief answers. So you could get back to talking about 14 at a 14 related event. But in hindsight, all of those ended up being incredibly accurate predictions of what 16 is.
It's going to be interesting to see how, because FanFest, how we started this conversation off and how it evolved into this. So guys, be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and go check out that, FanFest discussion that we just had here on the channel. Because we talked about that, it'd be great because FanFest happens after 16's release. You got to think that like the build up, the marketing, and sure, there's going to be a PC release. And sure, once Activision, Blizzard, and all that stuff gets acquired by Microsoft or gets shut down Microsoft, I'm sure we'll probably see some kind of announcement from Sony going like, all right, well, now that's, after we did that fight and, tried to keep Call of Duty, well, I guess we're going to go and just buy, like, it feels like that's the relationship already. It's like, well, we don't want to come out and be like, hey, yeah, we're also buying Square Enix because
Sony would have no problem buying Square Enix, but they cannot announce that while they are accusing Microsoft of being jerks for buying up a major publisher.
Right. It's like, all right. So I just have to wonder, like, if some of this relationship within Square Enix from just a financial and motivation perspective is like all hinging on Final Fantasy 14 because everything else is just kind of struggling in Game Pass. Because talking about Forspoken, I tweeted out, I beat it. I finished the story for Forspoken in under 20 hours, giving myself actual time to do side quests and run around. I actually liked the game. Like, I thought Forspoken was interesting. A lot of it speaks to my personal experience growing up. My mother was abandoned by her father. My dad lost his mother to cancer at a young age. I know people who have abandonment issues very, very personally. And so her character being a 21-year-old, kid from New York, having and struggling with that aspect, like, I felt like it felt real to me. It felt like this was a real character, and this was just a wild experience. So I really connected, like, in a weird way with Forspoken. But then I'm like, oh, it was a $70 game, not released everywhere, like on PlayStation, on PC. And then you were like, well, I guess we didn't sell enough of these copies.
Kind of on PC.
Yeah, you got a 30, you got a 4080, you got a 4, and not on GeForce Now. So again,
does your PC still have some of that satisfying plastic to pull off? If the answer is no, then it's not going to run.
Not
on
for
it.
you.
Like,
yeah, but it's like but again, like, under, like, we talk about the dollar per hour, and it's like, from a calculation perspective, yes, I was happy that I played it. But what is its actual value? What is its actual worth? And then obviously, but before I could beat the game, because that's the world I live in. Before I could beat the game, literally they absorbed that studio. Like, hey, we're gonna build the studio to explore new IPs. Nope. Like, all right, well, we're gonna just do something else. And honestly, it's like, within the company itself, like, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with 16. I know Yoshi-P says he's gonna be 14 for the, like, his life's work, this the rest of his thing. But it's like, at some point, like, does Yoshi-P need to take over more of just the overall, like, I know management, like, that's not fun, but his style, his delivery, I think will be interesting to see the impact of 16 if successful. He's talked about how hard it is to make a Final Fantasy game because you got all these people trying to, like, no, it's got to have this, it's got to do this. He's like, no. I think they need to be making more Final Fantasy games more frequently, because the bigger, like, they take so long now, the longer the gap, like, it ends up building up this fervency that it will not satisfy everybody, and nor should it. It never had to as a game, as a franchise in the past, because you had another 1 to 2 years later. Like, before, they were hitting those things out of the park, and so you might like 6, but maybe 7 was like, it, and then it's kept cascading and became such a gap that I think that's one of the things that, even with Forspoken, the best thing that they could have done with Forspoken is follow it up with Forspoken 2, and then, like, bada bing, bada boom, so you can build up that fan base. But that's just me, and that's what Final Fantasy 14 actually does. 14 is the only Final Fantasy main story that comes out every 2 years, right? Like, every 2 years, it's its own self-contained RPG built on the backs of, an MMO shared architecture.
I mean, there is an argument to be said that, like, probably one of the greatest video game team managers of all time should be managing more stuff. Like, Yoshi-P is, like, coach of the year, he is, that's what he is a industry defining team manager. That's his skill set. He's not the head artist. He's not the head encounter designer. He's not the head writer.
Right.
All these things, like, everybody credits all the wins of Final Fantasy 14 to a handful of names, but, like, what Yoshi-P has in common with all those names, whether it's his name or somebody else's that's being listed, is that he's their manager. That's what he does. His workflows are incredible, and he has people that help him with that. And he's had some of them on various panels, and we've had them at the second half of Live Letters and stuff like that, where we've seen the workflows for different localization teams and all that. But when asked in, I believe it was like a Dengeku or one of the other, like, Japanese interviews. So I believe it was a native speaking interview. And the thing about native speaking interviews is they tend to be a lot more conversational. It's a lot less cute question, answer. But their conversation took a turn where an English one most likely would not have gone. Most of the English ones are something along the lines of, can you tell me in very short words what you hate most about working for Square Enix? And, like, he can't answer. But when it came up conversationally, there was a general gist of the conversation of, which parts of your job do you find the most rewarding versus others? And it kind of came out of that question that effectively the least rewarding parts of Yoshi-P's job are the corporate parts, the parts where he has to sit in big meetings talking about units delivered and stuff like that. But in that same conversation, he did kind of, like, preface that with, it's incredibly important. It's what allows him to secure the level of resources that his creative business unit 3 gets. Like, it's incredibly important. It's just not as fun as talking about what goes into the video game. The video game's the fun part, and all of those big, like, the fact that he's a director is something that he feels is incredibly necessary to make him able to deliver what he can. But the actual responsibilities of being director are the least exciting parts of what he gets to work on, as opposed to like running final quality checks on the next Ultimate or something like that. That's way more fun.
I hope that with the shakeup, especially in the leadership, because I've actually been concerned about the CEO of Square Enix for a long time, because he was the former CFO. In my experience, when you put a financially minded, accountant in charge of a whole company, some things will suffer, because you need to have that accountant, but you also need that kind of visionary. And I'm hoping that the new guy ends up being like, okay, let's, what are we doing right? Where are we struggling? How can we get better? And then, not that you have to put Yoshi-P in charge of the whole company, but he has his, like, learn from his methodology, because his methodology is the only one, in my opinion, that's truly delivering year over year, at least every 2 years when it comes to the expansion. And Final Fantasy 16 will be that kind of, marker in the sand. Is his strategy, is everything he's working on effective, especially when it comes to a single player game? Because if it's another 6 years before like Final Fantasy 17 even sees the light of day, like that is a concern that for the franchise itself, because it just carries too much excess weight. Where if it was, again, we've talked about this, and that's one of the things that we've seen, be a strength within things. And that's why probably Activision, is worth so much what it is, despite how it can burn players out. Oh gosh, another Call of Duty, but then they knock it out of the park like they did last year, and then all of a sudden it's it's all hands on deck, let's freaking go.
And your dad's a CPA, and so like he's the first person that I ever heard tell me, I was in college when he told me like the importance of finance, and it's really helped me over the years. Anytime I've had a question about finance, he's definitely one of the people I can call. And he's always had really insightful views on finance, and definitely feels there's importance to managing your money and especially on behalf of an organization. And at that same time, he is also the person who very first argued to me why the accountant should not be the head honcho. Like finance should absolutely be in the room when decisions are made, but a CEO that comes from the finance side of things has a tendency of losing sight of the core value of what got you there, because they're looking at the money side. Yeah. And the business didn't start with, we have more money coming in than going out. The business started with an idea, a passion, something you wanted to bring to market.
I always
like can get lost.
Yeah. I always like it when the CEO and the CFO, like, they're working towards the same goal, but they're pushing up on each other. Because it's important. You can't sit here and just spend all your money, and then the vision dies because you're out of money.
That's how then,
and that's so funny. Each founder over on Twitch was like, "Yep, don't hate on us accountants." I mean, it's true. A CFO for a CEO is not an ideal idea. So we
have a position for them. We have a C-level position available for the guy who's really good at finance.
And that's who was right. And so the CEO who's leaving was the former CFO, and hopefully we'll see with this we get a new vision, because one of the things that just felt weird about Square Enix up to this whole point is literally like, it felt like doublespeak. It's like, hey, we're gonna like, and then it's like you're abandoning a lot of the things that at least the core audience likes. We're fine if you guys want to make new IP. We champion that, but it shouldn't come at the cost of like everything else that you're doing. And it was always just weird. It was the fact that he also said he was shocked by Bravely Default's success was like, oh yeah, like, why? Yeah, of course, Bravely Default it's a great game. Do that again, and we'll show
spreadsheet. I bet Octopath Traveler shocked him.
Yeah,
brand new IP for the kind of third tier console, with a combat system that statistically lowers your yield. Like, it just financially doesn't look like it. It looks like it'll perform fine. That we'll park a little money over there. It'll be a small team, and we'll get our return back. But if you have something better, I'd love to hear it. Yeah. And it blew the doors off, because it's amazing. Like, because Octopath Traveler is amazing. Yeah. And so I think, if you're just looking at the data, that's really hard. And it comes from the other side too. Like, a COO as a CEO has its own set of pros and cons and can absolutely be problematic. Tim Cook rose to power in Apple from being like the logistics guy. That's what he did. And you see it in Apple. Like, people look at Apple and they go, wow, it feels like only every third or fourth generation of iPhone do we have a true major innovation. But you know what Apple does really well? all those chip shortages, all those issues since 2020 didn't seem to affect Apple. They still largely shipped a lot of things on time. And so the logistics guy, like there's a reliability to Apple now, but it's a lot less exciting than when, you know, we had black turtleneck blue jeans up there going nuts. He's just not the showman. He's a logistics guy. It's a lot of what his biggest contribution to what made Apple shocking, in my opinion, is my understanding of Apple is he is the person who made possible the very first time they announced a new product and said it was available for order today.
Mm-hmm.
He was the person who made that possible. The idea that you could announce a product and the market did not know it was coming, no leaks, no nothing, and that you had enough of that in the pipeline that you could make it available for order and it could be shippable within 2 weeks, day and date of the announcement, that is an unbelievable of control of your supply lines. And that's what Tim Cook brought to Apple. That's my understanding, is that he's responsible for that change in policy. And so actually I got really frustrated the first time Apple announced a new phone or something and said, and it'll be available for order in 2 weeks. And it was Tim Cook saying, I was like, then you've dropped the ball, bud. Like that's your one thing. That's your thing. What do you mean it's not available now? Like that's what you guys do that no one else could do. So I was really disappointed the first time Apple didn't have a product available on launch after Tim Cook took over. It kind of marked a big change in that policy. So I don't know the exact timeline on all that, but like Yoshi-P as a manager is really good. I don't know that it should be Yoshi-P for CEO, because he's good at directly managing the music that goes into a game, directly managing the encounter. That doesn't mean he's good at managing multiple teams that are making games that are managing multiple teams that are making music. So like finding a CEO at that level is hard.
If Final Fantasy 16 is a success, and it's a weird kind of phrase to say because based off their PS5 exclusivity at launch, PC coming later, there's a real risk to kind of that hype and that excitement having that fire put out, right? It took Final Fantasy 15 sold 10 million units, but that was over the course of 6 years, right? Like I think and hope that 16 is financially successful. I do wonder what that overall cost is, and I do wonder if that deal with Sony is going to be a positive or negative one. Can't really say for sure, because I know a lot of people are going to be waiting to play this on PC, and I would say based off my time with Forespoken, I think 16 will probably be the premier version of 16 will be on PC. Like when you're talking about ultra wide support and all the different things that they've been bringing into their PC world, they've struggled with in the past with PC releases, but that's something that I hope they don't run into with 16. But ultimately, in terms of sales, in terms of Yoshi-P, like I want and hope that it's a success, and I hope that it's not that they put him in charge. Like keep him doing the fun stuff, because I want him to enjoy the job and stay there, but model what he's doing. Like look at and how it is being executed, and then find people and bring them up and raise them in that same kind of methodology and mindset, so that your projects are ideally more successful, and then ideally you're not having to waste so much time, money, resources on things that people just aren't interested in. And it's going to be interesting to see, like over the course, like here in 5 years, it's going to be interesting to look back and see like what is the impact, because there's so many other moving parts, right? A deal with Game Pass, a deal with PlayStation, now, and all of those things also could be having an impact on things like that, because as gamers, like one of the things that could be impacting sales is like, oh, I'll just wait till that comes on PlayStation now or on Game Pass, right? So there is an impact regardless of whether those games launch on them or not, because these are current services that people are ultimately offering.